Gideon Blackwood stood in the sweltering Georgia morning heat, watching a livestock truck lumber down the red dirt road toward his struggling farm. At 68, with calloused hands that had worked this same soil for 5 decades, he'd developed an instinct for recognizing trouble before it arrived at his doorstep. This truck, with its corporate logos and pristine paint job, represented exactly the kind of trouble the Blackwood farm couldn't afford. The Blackwood property had been in his family since 1897, passed down from his great-grandfather Jeremiah, who'd built the original farmhouse with timber cut from their own land. But 3 years of failed crops, predatory loan modifications, and mysteriously plummeting cattle prices had pushed Gideon to the brink of losing everything his ancestors had fought to build. The truck driver, a lean man with sun-weathered skin and tired eyes, climbed down from the cab clutching a clipboard and wearing the confused expression of someone whose day wasn't going according to plan. "You Gideon Blackwood? Got a livestock delivery here for a rejected bull. Paperwork says you specifically requested immediate transfer of refuse cattle from Titan Agricultural Processing." Gideon adjusted his faded Georgia Bulldog's cap and squinted at the driver. "Son, I haven't purchased livestock in over 2 years. Hell, I can barely afford feed for the dozen head I still got, much less take on somebody else's problem animals." "Well, sir, the documentation here's got your name printed clear as Sunday morning," the driver replied, extending the delivery forms toward Gideon. "Says Gideon Blackwood, 1247 Sweetwater Creek Road, Dawson County. GPS brought me right to your front gate." Gideon examined the papers with growing bewilderment and mounting anger. The signature at the bottom was an exact replica of his handwriting, but he'd never laid eyes on these documents before. The date indicated 3 weeks prior, a Thursday morning when he'd been sitting in Dawson County Bank, hat in hand, begging loan officer Patricia Steinberg for yet another extension on his mortgage payment. "There's been some serious mistake here," Gideon said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd never backed down from a challenge. "I never ordered any bull, especially not one that's been rejected by some processing plant." "Well, sir, I understand your confusion, but company policy's real clear on this," the driver explained, gesturing toward the trailer behind him. "If the designated receiver refuses delivery, the animal gets transported directly to emergency slaughter facilities. And just between us neighbors, this here's one magnificent specimen. Seems like a real shame to see him end up as dog food over some paperwork confusion." Gideon walked to the rear of the trailer and peered through the metal slats. Inside stood a truly impressive Black Angus bull, easily weighing 1,800 pounds, with the kind of perfect muscular development and genetic markers that serious cattle breeders paid premium prices to acquire. The animal's coat gleamed with health, his stance showed confidence and strength, and his overall conformation indicated superior bloodline genetics. "What exactly makes this bull a reject?" Gideon asked suspiciously. "Documentation just lists behavioral abnormalities, unsuitable for standard breeding protocols, but he's been calm as a church mouse the whole trip here." That's when Gideon noticed something that sent ice-cold dread shooting through his veins. Attached to the bull's left ear was a bright orange identification tag bearing numbers he recognized. The same tracking system used by Titan Agricultural Processing, the massive corporate conglomerate that had been systematically acquiring failing family farms throughout North Georgia for the past 5 years. "Driver, who exactly initiated this delivery request? I mean, what person actually called your company and arranged this transport?" "Says right here it was ordered by Titan Land Development Services on behalf of Blackwood Farms LLC. Full delivery fee paid in advance. Cash transaction." Gideon felt puzzle pieces clicking together in his mind, forming a picture that made his blood pressure spike dangerously. Titan Land Development was the property acquisition division of the same mega corporation that owned Titan Agricultural Processing. For 3 years, they'd been circling his farm like buzzards, making increasingly aggressive and insulting offers to purchase his family's ancestral land. "I'll accept delivery of the bull," Gideon announced suddenly. "You certain about that, sir? I can still turn this rig around and—" "I'm certain. Put him in the east pasture next to the creek." As the massive bull was carefully guided into his pasture, Gideon studied the animal with the experienced eye of someone who'd been evaluating livestock for half a century. This wasn't just valuable breeding stock. This was championship-quality genetics, the kind of bull that would normally command $25,000 or more at auction. The The bone structure was perfect, the muscle definition exceptional, and the overall proportions indicated bloodlines that cattle ranchers would fight over. But if this bull represented such valuable genetics, why would Titan reject him? And more troubling still, why would they arrange delivery to a struggling farm they'd been aggressively trying to purchase? After the transport truck disappeared down Sweetwater Creek Road, Gideon called his oldest friend and neighboring rancher, Augustus Gus Pemberton, who'd been raising prize cattle in Georgia for 43 years. "Gus, you ever heard of Titan Processing rejecting a bull for behavioral abnormalities?" "Gideon, that outfit don't reject valuable animals unless something's fundamentally wrong. Their entire business model depends on processing maximum volume for maximum profit. They wouldn't turn away a $20,000 bull unless..." Gus paused meaningfully. "Unless that animal represented evidence of something they desperately needed to eliminate. Evidence of what kind of wrongdoing? Could be anything illegal. Unauthorized hormone treatments, experimental drug testing, genetic modifications they ain't got government approval for. These massive corporations, they push every boundary they can find." That evening, as Gideon was performing his routine livestock check, he observed something peculiar about the new bull's behavior. The animal kept pawing insistently at one specific location in the pasture, like he was attempting to excavate something buried there. When Gideon approached, the bull stepped aside almost deliberately, as if trying to direct his attention to that exact spot. Gideon retrieved a shovel from his equipment barn and began digging where the bull had indicated. Approximately 3 feet down, his shovel struck something solid and metallic. After 30 minutes of careful excavation, he unearthed a waterproof storage container roughly the size of a large toolbox. Inside were documents that made Gideon's weathered hands tremble as he absorbed their contents. Veterinary records documenting systematic illegal hormone injections in cattle destined for human consumption. Financial spreadsheets proving deliberate price manipulation in regional livestock markets. And most devastating of all, a comprehensive list of family farms targeted for acquisition through coordinated market manipulation and banking pressure tactics. Blackwood Farms was number 4 on the list. The documents detailed an elaborate scheme where Titan would artificially suppress local cattle prices, pressure regional banks to accelerate loan repayment schedules, and then acquire struggling properties for fractions of their legitimate market value. Gideon's financial catastrophe wasn't the result of bad luck or poor farming decisions. It was the calculated outcome of corporate warfare against family agriculture. But the most chilling document was an internal memo dated just 10 days earlier. Blackwood acquisition 85% complete. Recommend final pressure through contamination scare deployment. Utilize rejected test subject for evidence discovery and credibility destruction. The terrible truth crashed over Gideon like a collapsing barn. The rejected bull wasn't a shipping mistake, it was a trap. They'd planned for him to discover these documents, expecting him to contact authorities and create a public scandal that would complete the destruction of his reputation and financial standing. But as Gideon studied the papers more thoroughly, he recognized something else. These documents weren't just proof of crimes committed against him. They were evidence that could topple the entire Titan operation and save dozens of other family farms from identical destruction. The question that would keep him awake all night was simple but terrifying. Did he possess the courage to wage war against a billion-dollar corporation with unlimited legal resources and political connections? And if he chose to fight, would anyone believe a bankrupt old farmer over a company with teams of lawyers and public relations experts? As he sat at his kitchen table surrounded by evidence of his own systematic destruction, Gideon Blackwood faced the most important decision of his 68 years. The bull that had arrived by mistake had presented him with a choice that would determine not just his own fate, but the future of family farming in Georgia. Have you ever felt like powerful interests were working against ordinary people? What would you do if you discovered proof that your life was being deliberately destroyed by corporate greed? Like this video if you're already hoping Gideon fights back against this injustice. Subscribe because Chapter 2 reveals Gideon's dangerous plan and the shocking ally who might help him take down Titan. Gideon barely slept that night. The damning documents spread across his kitchen table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that revealed a picture too terrible to fully comprehend. Every time he dozed off in his recliner, he'd jolt awake thinking about the years of struggle that hadn't been bad luck at all, but calculated attacks on everything his family had built. At dawn, he was startled by urgent knocking on his front door. Through the window, he saw Augustus Pemberton standing on his porch, but his old friend looked nothing like his usual calm self. Gus's clothes were wrinkled like he'd slept in them, his gray hair was disheveled, and his eyes held the kind of fear Gideon had never seen in 40 years of friendship. "Gus, what in the hell?" "Gideon, we need to talk, right now, and not out here where anyone can see us." Gus pushed past him into the house, immediately walking to the windows and checking to make sure the curtains were closed. "You found something in that bull delivery, didn't you?" Gus said without preamble. "Something that scared you enough to stay up all night thinking about it." Gideon stared at his friend in bewilderment. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because the same exact thing happened to me 6 months ago." Gus's voice was barely above a whisper. "Different delivery company, different excuse for the animal, but the same setup. They sent me a sick heifer that led me straight to buried evidence of their crimes." "You knew about Titan's operation and didn't warn me?" "I couldn't!" Gus's voice cracked with raw emotion. "They made it crystal clear what would happen if I talked to anyone. Gideon, they didn't just threaten my farm or my livelihood, they threatened my granddaughter Sarah. She's only 8 years old, and they knew her school schedule, her after-school activities, everything about her daily routine." Gideon felt his blood turn to ice water. "They threatened a child?" "Showed me photographs of her walking to school, playing in her backyard, getting on the school bus. Said tragic accidents happen to families that don't cooperate with corporate interests." Gus sat heavily in Gideon's kitchen chair, his weathered hands shaking. "I've been living in absolute hell for 6 months, watching them systematically destroy other farms while staying silent to protect that little girl." "Show me what they gave you." Gus pulled a manila envelope from inside his jacket. The documents were similar to what Gideon had found, but focused on a different aspect of Titan's criminal operation: systematic contamination of local water supplies specifically designed to damage crop yields and force farm sales. "Gideon, they've been deliberately poisoning the groundwater feeding into Sweetwater Creek for 3 years. Remember when your corn yields dropped 40% 2 seasons ago? That wasn't drought or soil depletion. They were introducing chemical runoff upstream that specifically targets grain crops while leaving their own corporate farms unaffected." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Gideon's mysterious crop failures, the unexplained livestock illnesses that cost him thousands in veterinary bills, the sudden drop in milk production from his dairy cows, all of it had been deliberate sabotage designed to push him toward bankruptcy and desperation. How many other farmers know about this conspiracy? At least 6 that I'm aware of, maybe more. They use the exact same pattern: deliver an animal that leads to buried evidence, then threaten families to ensure complete silence. It's like they want us to know what they're doing, but guarantee we can never act on the information. Then why are they collecting evidence against themselves? That makes no sense. Gus was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Insurance policy. If any of us ever tries to go public or contact authorities, they can claim we planted the evidence ourselves out of desperation. They've got our fingerprints on the documents, our property as the discovery location, our financial desperation as clear motive for fabricating evidence against them. It's the perfect legal setup to destroy our credibility while protecting themselves from prosecution. The genius of the scheme was horrifying in its calculated simplicity. Titan had transformed their victims into unwilling accomplices, creating an intricate web of silence enforced by fear and carefully constructed legal traps that would spring shut on anyone who tried to seek justice. "But there has to be something we can do," Gideon said desperately. "We can't just sit here and let them steal our ancestral land and destroy our family's legacies. Maybe there is a way to fight back." Gus leaned forward conspiratorially, lowering his voice even further. 3 weeks ago, I received a phone call from a woman who claimed to work inside Titan's corporate structure. Said she'd been secretly documenting their illegal activities and was actively looking for farmers willing to testify against the company. Could be another trap, another layer of their operation. That's exactly what I thought initially. But she knew specific details about their operation that only a genuine insider would have access to. Knew about the water contamination timeline, the forged loan documents, even the exact threats they'd made against my granddaughter. What did this mysterious woman want from you? A coordinated meeting. all the affected farmers gathering together, sharing our evidence, and organizing a unified response. She claimed to have additional documentation that could bring down not just their local operation, but Titan's entire southeast expansion strategy. Gideon considered this revelation carefully. After 5 decades of farming, he'd developed a healthy suspicion of anything that seemed too convenient or too good to be true. But he'd also learned to recognize when a situation was desperate enough to justify taking calculated risks with potentially devastating consequences. Where and when is this supposed meeting? Tomorrow night at the old Sweetwater Baptist Church, the abandoned building since the congregation moved to their new facility on Highway 9. She specifically chose that location because it's isolated but on neutral ground, and the building has excellent sight lines to spot anyone who might be conducting surveillance. How do we know she's legitimate and not just another component of their psychological warfare operation? We don't, Gus admitted with brutal honesty. But Gideon, what realistic choice do we have at this point? They're going to systematically steal our farms regardless of whether we cooperate or resist. At least this approach gives us a fighting chance to strike back before we lose everything our family's built. That afternoon, Gideon spent hours walking his property boundaries, examining his land with completely new perspective. Every field, every fence line, every barn and outbuilding represented 5 generations of Blackwood family sacrifice, determination, and dreams. His great-grandfather Jeremiah had cleared these fields by hand using nothing but an axe and raw determination. His grandfather had survived the Great Depression by growing food for neighbors who couldn't afford grocery store prices. His father had mechanized the operation and expanded it into a genuinely profitable agricultural business. Now it was all going to be lost to corporate greed and legal manipulation, unless he somehow found the courage to take on an enemy with unlimited financial resources and absolutely no moral constraints whatsoever. The next evening, Gideon drove to the abandoned Sweetwater Baptist Church with his truck's headlights off until the last possible moment. The old white clapboard building sat in a grove of ancient oak trees, its paint peeling and windows boarded up since the congregation had moved to their modern facility 5 years earlier. But the structure was solid, and more importantly, it offered clear views of the surrounding countryside. Anyone approaching could be spotted from half a mile away. He arrived 30 minutes early, parking behind the building where his truck wouldn't be visible from the main road. As he sat in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of rural Georgia, Gideon couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into either salvation or a carefully orchestrated trap. At exactly 9 o'clock, headlights appeared on the access road. Gus arrived first, followed by vehicles that Gideon recognized as belonging to farmers from throughout the county. Ezekiel Thornton, whose dairy operation had mysteriously failed 18 months ago. Clarence Washburn, who'd lost half his cattle to unexplained illness last spring. Jeremiah Stone, whose family had been farming the same land since before the Civil War, until sudden bank foreclosure proceedings began 6 weeks ago. One by one, 6 farmers gathered in the moonlit churchyard, their faces grim with the shared understanding that their presence here represented either the beginning of their fight for survival or the final act of their agricultural legacy. "Gentlemen," a woman's voice called from the church's front steps, "thank you for coming." The woman who emerged from the shadows was not what Gideon had expected. Dr. Sarah Mackenzie appeared to be in her early 40s, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to corporate boardrooms. She wore expensive clothes that marked her as an outsider to their rural community, but her eyes held an intensity that suggested genuine commitment to whatever cause had brought her here. "My name is Dr. Sarah Mackenzie, and until 3 weeks ago, I was Titan Agricultural Processing's Director of Environmental Compliance. I'm here because I can no longer stand by while this company systematically destroys farming families throughout the Southeast." She opened a briefcase and spread documents across the church's front steps, using a flashlight to illuminate pages that made Gideon's stomach clench with recognition. "What you've discovered on your individual properties represents just the surface of Titan's criminal enterprise. For the past 4 years, I've been documenting a coordinated campaign to acquire family farmland through environmental sabotage, financial manipulation, and legal fraud on a scale that extends across 7 states. Dr. Mackenzie's documents detailed operations that dwarfed anything the farmers had imagined: systematic contamination of water supplies affecting over 200 family farms, coordinated manipulation of commodity prices that had bankrupted dozens of multi-generational agricultural operations, fraudulent loan modifications processed through banks that received substantial kickbacks from Titan's financial partners. The pattern is always identical, she explained. First, they conduct reconnaissance disguised as agricultural surveys or environmental studies. Then they begin subtle sabotage, water contamination, soil treatment that damages specific crops, introduction of livestock diseases. As financial pressure mounts, they corrupt local banking officials to accelerate foreclosure proceedings while simultaneously making lowball purchase offers through shell companies. Clarence Washburn spoke up, his voice rough with suppressed anger. If you knew all this, why didn't you contact authorities years ago? I tried. The FBI Agricultural Crimes Division, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Georgia Department of Agriculture. But Titan's legal department anticipated whistleblower problems. Every agency I contacted received carefully constructed evidence suggesting that I was a disgruntled employee fabricating claims against my former employer. So why should we trust you now? Ezekiel demanded. Dr. Mackenzie's response was to produce a recording device. Because 3 weeks ago I attended a corporate strategy meeting where Titan's executives discussed the final solution for resistant family farmers in North Georgia. They're planning to escalate beyond financial pressure and environmental sabotage. She pressed play, and the farmers listened with growing horror to voices discussing accidents that would eliminate problematic landowners who refused to sell. The recording included specific names, including Gideon Blackwood and Augustus Pemberton. They're planning to kill us? Gus whispered. Not directly, but they've arranged for industrial accidents, equipment failures, and environmental contaminations that will appear accidental but are designed to be fatal. The insurance payouts will go to next of kin, who will be much more willing to sell the properties. The weight of this revelation settled over the group like a suffocating blanket. They weren't just fighting for their farms anymore. They were fighting for their lives. What do you propose we do? Gideon asked. Coordinate our evidence and present it simultaneously to multiple agencies while ensuring our own protection. I have documentation proving corruption in local law enforcement, so we'll need to go directly to federal authorities. But we need to move fast. I estimate we have less than 2 weeks before they begin implementing their final solution. Jeremiah Stone, the oldest farmer present at 74, spoke with the authority of someone who'd survived decades of agricultural challenges. Dr. Mackenzie, what guarantee do we have that you're not just another layer of their operation? How do we know this isn't designed to gather us all in one place for elimination? You don't, she admitted. But consider this. If I wanted to harm you, would I need to gather you together? They already know who you are, where you live, and exactly how vulnerable you've become. This meeting represents your only chance to coordinate a response before they pick you off individually. As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of approaching vehicles echoed across the countryside. Multiple engines, moving fast toward the church. Everyone to your trucks, Dr. I, Mackenzie commanded, suddenly all business. Different routes home, no patterns they can follow. We'll communicate through Gus as our intermediary. Trust no one else, including family members, until this is resolved. As the farmers scattered to their vehicles, Gideon realized that the quiet life he'd known for 68 years was over forever. Win or lose, the battle for Blackwood Farms would determine not just his own fate, but the future of family agriculture in Georgia. The bull that had started this nightmare was still grazing peacefully in his east pasture, unaware that his arrival had ignited a war between corporate greed and everything decent people held sacred. 3 days after the church meeting, Gideon woke to the acrid smell of smoke drifting through his bedroom window. He stumbled outside in his nightclothes to find his equipment barn engulfed in flames, 30 years of farming machinery being consumed by fire that burned too hot and too fast to be accidental. The volunteer fire department arrived within 20 minutes, but it was too late to save anything. Fire Chief Bobby Garrison, a man Gideon had known since Bobby was in elementary school, pulled him aside as the flames died down. Gideon, I'm real sorry, but this wasn't an electrical fire or spontaneous combustion. Someone used accelerant, probably diesel fuel, to torch your barn. This was arson. Any idea who might have done it? Bobby's expression was troubled. Officially, no. but I got a call 30 minutes before we got your emergency call. Anonymous tip saying there was going to be a dangerous fire at your property tonight and that we should respond quickly to prevent it from spreading to your house. The message was unmistakable. Titan was demonstrating their reach and their willingness to escalate violence while maintaining plausible deniability. They'd destroyed his farming equipment while simultaneously positioning themselves as concerned citizens protecting his home. Later that morning, Gus called with equally disturbing news. Gideon. They got to Clarence Washburn last night. His well water tested positive for contamination levels that'll kill his remaining livestock within days, and Ezekiel found all his fence gates open this morning, half his herd scattered across 3 counties. What about Dr. Mackenzie? That's the worst part. Her hotel room was broken into, her rental car vandalized, and the front desk received an anonymous complaint about her suspicious behavior. Hotel management asked her to leave. Where is she now? Nobody knows. She was supposed to contact me yesterday with coordinates for delivering our evidence to federal authorities, but I haven't heard anything. That afternoon, Gideon received an unexpected visitor. Rebecca Chen from Titan Agricultural Processing arrived in a black sedan with tinted windows, accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits who remained by the vehicle while she approached his front porch. Mr. Blackwood, I believe we need to have a conversation about recent events. I don't have anything to say to you people. I think you do. She opened a tablet computer and showed him photographs that made his blood run cold. Pictures of his nephew Tommy's school in Atlanta, his sister Martha getting into her car outside the grocery store, his elderly mother entering the assisted living facility where she'd been residing for the past 2 years. We know about your little meeting at the church, Chen continued conversationally. We know about Dr. Mackenzie's recording device and her promises to help you fight our company. What you need to understand is that this situation can end peacefully, or it can end very badly for people you care about. What do you want? Your signature on a property transfer agreement. Fair market value, immediate cash payment, no foreclosure proceedings or credit damage. You get to walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, and your family members continue living their normal, safe lives. She produced a contract from her briefcase. The purchase price was actually generous, more than Gideon had expected his property to be worth given his financial circumstances. You have 24 hours to decide, Chen said. After that, we can't guarantee that accidents won't start happening to people you love. After she left, Gideon sat on his porch staring at the contract. The rational part of his mind recognized this as his best option. Take the money, relocate somewhere far from Titan's influence, and live out his remaining years in peaceful retirement. But the stubborn part of his soul, the part that carried 5 generations of Blackwood family pride, rebelled against surrendering to corporate terrorism. That evening, his phone rang. Dr. Mackenzie's voice was strained and urgent. Gideon, they found me. I'm hiding in a motel outside Macon, but they'll track me down soon. Listen carefully. I've uploaded everything to a secure server that will automatically release our evidence to 23 different agencies if I don't check in every 12 hours. What does that mean for us? It means we have one chance to end this. I need you to gather the other farmers tomorrow night at your property. All of them, with all their evidence. We're going to force a confrontation that will either expose Titan's crimes or get us all killed. That sounds like suicide, maybe. But it's the only way to ensure that even if we don't survive, the truth gets told and other farming families are protected. As Gideon hung up the phone, he realized that his decision had been made the moment Chen showed him those photographs of his family. Some things were worth dying for, and the land his great-grandfather had cleared with his own hands was one of them. The bull in his east pasture had brought him evidence of corporate evil, but now it was up to Gideon to decide whether he had the courage to use that evidence, regardless of the personal cost. Tomorrow night would determine whether the Blackwood legacy ended with a whimper of surrender or a roar of defiance that would echo across Georgia for generations to come. The next evening, as purple twilight settled over Dawson County, 6 pickup trucks converged on Blackwood farms like gathering storm clouds. Each farmer arrived carrying a box of evidence, their faces set with the grim determination of men who had chosen to make their final stand on ground that meant more than their own lives. Gideon had spent the day preparing his property for what might be its last night under Blackwood ownership. He'd moved his remaining livestock to the safest pastures, secured important family documents in a fireproof safe, and written letters to his nephew Tommy and sister Martha explaining his decisions. Dr. Mackenzie arrived last, driving a different rental car with Georgia plates. She looked exhausted and frightened, but her voice remained steady as she addressed the assembled farmers. "Gentlemen, I won't lie to you about what we're facing tonight. Titan knows we're here and they're coming, but I've arranged for something they don't expect. Federal agents are already in position around this property, recording everything that happens." She pointed toward the tree line where barely visible figures moved through the shadows. "Agricultural crimes investigators, FBI Environmental Crimes Unit, and EPA enforcement officers. Whatever Titan does tonight will be documented and used as evidence in federal court." "What if they don't show up?" Clarence asked. "They'll show up," Gideon said with certainty. "Their whole operation depends on maintaining the illusion of legitimacy. They can't afford to let us coordinate our evidence and present a unified case. They have to stop us tonight." As if summoned by his words, headlights appeared on the county road. Not the single vehicles they'd expected, but a convoy of black SUVs moving fast toward the farm entrance. "Everyone stay calm," Dr. Mackenzie instructed. "Remember, we're being recorded. Whatever they do, don't give them excuse to claim self-defense." The lead vehicle stopped at Gideon's gate, and Rebecca Chen stepped out accompanied by 6 men who looked more like private military contractors than corporate employees. Behind them, additional vehicles disgorged personnel carrying equipment that definitely wasn't standard business gear. "Mr. Blackwood," Chen called out, her voice amplified by a bullhorn. "You were given 24 hours to accept our generous offer. That time has expired." "I'm not selling," Gideon replied, his voice carrying clearly across the farmyard. "Then you've chosen the consequences. Under Georgia agricultural safety statutes, we have authority to quarantine this property due to contaminated livestock that pose a public health threat." She gestured toward the bull in the east pasture. "That animal carries experimental medications that make it dangerous to human health. We're here to confiscate it and secure this property until decontamination procedures can be completed." It was a masterful legal maneuver. By claiming public health authority, they could justify armed occupation of his property while appearing to act in the community's interest. "The bull is perfectly healthy," Dr. Mackenzie stepped forward. "I have veterinary certifications proving there's no contamination." "Dr. Mackenzie," Chen's smile was predatory, "you're no longer employed by Titan Agricultural Processing. Your certifications have no legal validity here." "But mine do." A new voice cut through the night air as a woman in an FBI windbreaker emerged from the shadows. "Special Agent Patricia Valdez, Federal Agricultural Crimes Task Force. Dr. Mackenzie is now operating under federal whistleblower protection, and her evidence has been authenticated by our laboratories." Chen's composure cracked slightly. "Agent Valdez, this is a local health matter under state jurisdiction. Not when it involves interstate agricultural fraud, environmental terrorism, and conspiracy to commit murder." Agent Valdez held up a warrant. "Rebecca Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit agricultural terrorism under federal statutes." The next few minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Federal agents materialized from positions around the property, surrounding Titan's personnel. Chen and her associates were handcuffed and led away, while additional agents secured their vehicles and equipment. "Mr. Blackwood," Agent Valdez approached him as the last of Titan's people were loaded into federal transport vehicles. "Your evidence, combined with Dr. Mackenzie's documentation and what we seized tonight, will shut down Titan's Southeast operations permanently. More importantly, it'll protect dozens of other farming families from experiencing what you've been through." 3 months later, Gideon stood in his rebuilt equipment barn, watching his nephew Tommy help with the morning chores. The insurance settlement from Titan's corporate assets had paid for new machinery, while federal agricultural assistance programs had helped him restore his contaminated fields. The bull that had started everything still grazed peacefully in the east pasture, now the unofficial symbol of Blackwood Farm's victory over corporate greed. Gideon had refused several offers to buy the animal, knowing that some things were worth more than money. Dr. Mackenzie had established a non-profit organization to help family farmers fight agricultural terrorism, using the Blackwood case as a model for resistance. Gus Pemberton's granddaughter Sarah could play safely in her backyard again, no longer under the shadow of corporate threats. But perhaps most importantly, the Blackwood land would remain in family hands for another generation. Tommy had announced his intention to study agricultural engineering, ensuring that the farm his great-great-great-grandfather had carved from Georgia wilderness would continue producing food for their community. As Gideon watched the sunrise paint his fields gold, he reflected on the lesson the bull had taught him. Sometimes the most valuable things arrive when you least expect them, and the courage to protect what matters most can defeat even the most powerful enemies. The legacy of Blackwood Farms was secure, and that was worth every risk he'd taken to preserve it.